Welcome to the Core Women Podcast, where meaningful conversations inspire leadership, connection, and possibility. Hosted by Dr. Summer Watson, this internationally recognized podcast features women who are making an impact in business, community, education, healthcare, and beyond. Through honest stories and practical wisdom, we explore what it means to lead, grow, and thrive in a rapidly changing world. And now, your host, Dr. Summer Watson.
Welcome back to the Core Women Podcast. Today, I'm honored to welcome Dr. Jasmine Escalera, a spiritual neuroscientist, speaker, and founder of the Institute for Generational Healing. Jasmine's work sits at the powerful intersection of neuroscience, ancestral wisdom, and personal transformation. She is dedicated to helping individuals and communities understand the inherent patterns, beliefs, and survival strategies that shape how we live, lead, and love, as well as show up in the world. Through her research, education, and healing work, she empowers people to break generational cycles and create a future aligned with intention, healing, and possibility. Today, we're diving into generational healing, ancestral patterns, and how understanding what we've inherited can help us consciously choose what we carry forward. Welcome, Jasmine.
Hello there. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm super excited about this conversation.
Oh, I'm excited to have you here. But before we get into your professional journey, if you could describe your life to this point in one word, what would that word be and why?
The word would definitely be determination. My dad actually was the one who told me if I could summarize you in one word, it would be determination. So I'm going to use his word.
Okay, I love it. Well, let me ask you, why determination? Why is that word important to you?
I think that word really coalesces around the story of the Institute for Generational Healing. I grew up in the projects of Brooklyn, New York, and my dad grew up in that same project. My parents grew up in very low income families. And we grew up, it was tough. The situation was really challenging. And my dad and my mom decided you're going to be the one to make it out. And the way that you're going to do that is you're going to go to school, you're going to get a degree, and you're going to get a good job. And it wasn't just my parents that really made that their personal mission. It was also my community. My community really backed me when it come to staying on the straight and narrow and making it out of the projects. It was almost kind of like if someone makes it out, there's this feeling like we all get to make it out. And so I was very determined to live that mission for my family, for my parents, and for my community. The thing about that mission, though, was that it was an inherited mission. It was an inherited story and version of success. And although it was very beautiful because I was able to make it out, I got my PhD from Yale, I was able to have a very successful career and make my family and community very proud, it wasn't necessarily my definition of success. And so when I really started to kind of look at my life and ask myself, why do I feel so successful on paper, but inevitably feel very unhappy having the marriage, having the great job, having these degrees and accolades, but still feeling very unfulfilled? Where I ended up landing was I inherited a story of success. I inherited someone else's ideas and concepts of success, and I had achieved that, and I'm very grateful for that. But it wasn't my version, and my parents' version of success was really looped around survival. They wanted for me to have a better life. They wanted me to get out of this survival state. But survival and happiness for them were never necessarily interconnected. And so really the Institute for Generational Healing is sort of built on that framework of we very much inherit many things. And some of those are stories, some of those are a way of being, some of those are beliefs, some of those are holding us back from the life that we want. And we have to consciously be aware of whose life are we living, how are we living within inherited stories and inherited patterns and inherited cycles, and can we consciously choose how we want to proceed and live now as the version of ourselves that we are.
Well, thank you for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us a bit of a step back because you do mention the Institute for Generational Healing, and I want you to talk about what that is and how that evolved.
Yeah, so the Institute for Generational Healing is a nonprofit organization that was founded earlier this year. And our mission is to really help individuals see the inherited survival patterns that they're living within, consciously go through the path of breaking those cycles that they need to break to be able to live in the life that they want to live, and to pass down the stories, the beliefs, the strategies, the mindsets that the next generation needs to live a deeper, richer life. We really truly aim to create the home for cycle breakers. What we are recognizing is that there are so many people out there who want to break the cycles that need to be broken from their family and community around survival. And we want to be the place where people can find out information about what that means, what that looks like, and how to actually do it. The Institute really stands firm in the fact that our families and our communities, just because of the situations, the historical trauma, the survival that they were going through, they often pass down things that can be very limiting. Many of these survival patterns are being lived currently, but they're hindering the way people move forward in their lives, move forward in their careers, move forward in love. What we at the Institute truly believe is that many of these things can sort of inhibit us from moving forward and do deserve to be broken in terms of these cycles. But we also recognize that our families and our communities pass down strength and resilience and tenacity and determination, and that deserves to be honored as well. So the way the Institute for Generational Healing really looks at healing is, how do we release what no longer serves us because it's not a part of our lives anymore? And how do we really honor the things that do get passed down from our family that we want to continue to pass along? And we're aiming to create the home for cycle breakers. There are so many people out there who want to break generational cycles, heal inherited trauma. And what we aim to do is to provide them the resources, the guidance, the education to do this with themselves, for their family, and within their community.
Well, I absolutely love what this is doing, what you've created. It's interesting because you had those generational barriers as well. You had those inherited patterns, so to speak. How did you begin personally to recognize that was going on with you? Because you said you had it all. It looked great on paper, it looked great to other people, but internally it wasn't aligning with how you felt. So tell us more.
Absolutely. I have to say that my journey started with one core desire, which is love. The desire to have healthy love as a woman who feels like she knows herself, is confident in herself, and can be loved for all of my great qualities. When I started on my journey of healing, it was post-divorce. It was post multiple relationships simply just not working out for me. And I really started asking myself some very, very hard questions about love. How did I learn about love? Where did I learn about love? What are the things that keep repeating that need to be broken? And that's where I started to realize that I wanted a healthy relationship and healthy love, but I couldn't point to anyone in my family that actually had a representation of that. And it was the first time that I realized that I inherited a love story. I inherited what love looked like and what women are supposed to be in relationships. And in order for me to really figure out how to break those patterns, I needed to understand the why. Why was I being so hyper independent in relationships and feeling like I wanted to be held and supported, but never allowing anyone to do that for me? Why did I feel like I have to give all of myself in a relationship to be loved, even to the point of completely dismissing my own needs? And I saw it so clearly happen with the women in my family and in my relationships. And that was my first glimpse into, wow, we inherit ways of being. And even if we are completely outside of the situation and the environment, and even if we are arm's length from our families just because we're living in different places or we're doing different things, we still live by those rules and we still live by that rule book. And so love was really the catalyst for me to start looking into my generational or inherited patterns and to say, if I want this, and this is the thing that I have not yet experienced, how am I myself sort of engaging in behaviors or ways of thought that are hindering me from having it? And then asking myself a very deep question, which is something I tell everyone to ask: where did you learn that? And I think that's the part of the puzzle that can be so profound, is when you start to realize, I learned this from my environment, from my community, from my family. You start to really put the picture together where you say, well, if I learn this, can I unlearn it? And if I unlearn it, what would I want to relearn?
Thank you so much for being so transparent about your own journey and where that aha moment or that realization came to be. How can someone begin to recognize whether a belief or a behavior they're struggling with may have been passed down through generations?
Yeah, such an interesting question. And the answer is likely it always is. And I think that I can definitely talk about steps and ways of really thinking about this from a reflective capacity. But really, I want to make sure that we coin this with it usually always is. And the reason why I truly say that is because science is really proving that trauma does get passed down through generations. We see that. We know that through epigenetics. We know that stress responses that are caused or induced by trauma, traumatic experiences, change someone's genetic codes, change someone's genetics, and that gets passed down through the generation. So that's scientifically how a trauma response can be passed. But there's also modeling and conditioning. There's also a lot going on in the home. So children learn through watching, they learn by seeing. So it doesn't even have to be that someone is telling you a specific rule of the home or a specific rule of the community. It really is that you see it on the day-to-day basis. So much of the behaviors that we think are personality, so much of the ways that we're thinking that we think are just, this is me, are actually inherited ways of being. They're inherited concepts and ideas that we absorbed from our families and from our communities. So my answer is likely it always is, because that's simply the way we learn as children. Unless we have already brought it to the surface, healed it, allowed it to move through us, and then made a conscious decision, do I want to continue to pass this along or do I want to break this here? Then it usually is just running the show in the background. Now, what I would say is, if you want to reflect on or consciously think about this, which I think we should, the question really does become, where did I learn this? So if I want to experience something in my life, if I want something in my life, if something isn't necessarily going the way I desire, to kind of go back to that question of, where did I learn this? How did I learn this? Who showed me this? And you'll start to see that likely it was your community that you absorbed this from, your culture, situations you were going through, your family. And so much of that really is something that is passed down to us. And I think that when we start to observe that, start to bring that to the surface and start to become aware of it, one of the most beautiful things is taking over the control and being able to say, well, if this is something that I learned, then it probably was because of a situation, an environment, or something that I was in. But likely you're no longer even in that situation or environment anymore. So it can be very helpful to say, this might have been passed down. I understand how it could have been passed down, but I'm not even in that environment, situation, community, whatever it is anymore. I can really let this go.
Yeah, there are multiple variables that really impact how we take on, absorb, and live, if we choose to, with those ways of being. But if there's a lack of awareness and we continue to live that path, we're going to be in survival mode potentially. We talk about modeling, you talked about personality, you talked about those inherent issues. And one of the things I'm thinking of is the prenatal aspect of this. There's so many variables that really influence how we live and evolve. As a spiritual neuroscientist and your work at the Institute for Generational Healing, how do you bridge the worlds of neuroscience and ancestral wisdom in a way that feels both credible and transformative?
I love this question so much. I mean, I think when I first started out in my scientific career, there was no intersection between spirituality and science, and so much of that is really evolving now. So when I started in my scientific career, and I don't necessarily want to date myself, but I may have to, we really separated those two concepts and those two things. You had to have scientific evidence for something, and spirituality at the time didn't necessarily have that scientific element Whereas now we are really understanding, and only within the last few decades, we always thought the brain was static. Now we know that the brain can change, the wiring can change, which is very much what we talk about when we talk about changing your mindset. So when we think about science and spirituality, that linkage is really happening a lot right now. And so with the Institute, what we aim to do is to really call to the forefront the science of the spiritual practice of generational healing. And how do we combine those two through things like concepts of epigenetics? When it comes to the ancestral side, I'm really excited about that part. My spiritual side truly believes that in order to heal the generations before you, in order to heal their pain, to transform those survival strategies that they had to live through, you really got to go back to the ancestral ways of healing. To heal your soul and your generational soul, you have to heal it through soulful methods that people used before. And so what we want to do at the Institute is talk about the ancestral modalities of healing, like dancing, drum circles, sound baths, and really start to focus on what's the science behind that. And a lot of this is starting to come, again, to the forefront. So we do know that sound baths emit certain types of transmissions and sound waves that can be very calming to your nervous system. So we're starting to make those connections now, and we're really excited at the Institute to focus on that, because we truly believe that ancestral wisdom and ancestral ways of healing are the best ways to heal generational wounds, because it's the way our ancestors did it.
So, what are some of the most common survival patterns people inherit that may be holding them back from living fully aligned lives?
Ooh, what a great question. So before the Institute was officially founded, when I was doing all the nonprofit paperwork, which if anyone has founded a nonprofit organization, bless you, because that paperwork is something. But I had decided, I really want to understand a little bit more about inherited survival patterns. Specifically, prior to starting the organization, my for-profit business that I had founded quite a few years ago was in professional development coaching. And the interesting thing that I had realized coaching so many women, particularly women of color, was that there were things that were holding them back in their professional and leadership career that had nothing to do with career and everything to do with how they saw themselves, how they grew up, the conditions that they grew up in, and that was displaying in how they presented themselves in the workplace. And so earlier this year, I created a research survey called the Relationship Pattern Quiz. And the Relationship Pattern Quiz was a quiz that I just had this core question of how are inherited survival patterns affecting women and women of color in all areas of their lives in regards to interactions with other people, relationships. So in the workplace, at home, in love. And so we were investigating 4 patterns that I had recognized in the women that I had coached, in myself and in my community, were major inherited patterns. And those are hyperindependence, self-abandonment, worth-proving, and peacekeeping. And through this survey, I was able to identify that for women of color specifically, of which over 70% of our survey respondents said that they were, in fact, from communities of color, hyperindependence was the number one. And as I've been speaking in communities, as I've been talking about this research work, that is definitely the one that resonates the most. And hyperindependence is very often feeling like you have to be the strong one, feeling like you have to carry everything on your own, feeling like you always have to be the one to step in. And the generational wound attached to that is really being in families and communities where you simply had to be the one to do that. There wasn't anyone else around who was able to take over for you, who was reliably there to really be able to support you, to help you, to guide you. And so you just develop this strong one personality. And I would say that that's a big one with women of color and with women very often in general, is that feeling of hyperindependence. The other one that is very common, the second one, was self-abandonment in this particular population. So the idea that I have to almost kind of relinquish parts of self in order to be loved or accepted or cherished. And the generational wound around that is that that's how you had to engage in your family. In your family growing up, in order to be loved, it was very much about what you were doing for others rather than what you were doing for yourself. And so those are two, particularly in the community of women of color. Now, when we think about, for example, Black men, one that is coming up a lot. So we actually embarked on a project a few weeks ago called the Lineage Healers Archive. And what we are doing is interviewing cycle breakers from different communities, from different backgrounds, to truly understand what are the cycles that people most commonly feel they need to break, and what are they preserving in terms of what they want to pass down. And through that conversation and through those interviews, the one that's coming up very often for Black men and Black and brown men is the feeling of I needed to push down emotions and I needed to be present and available for everyone without really thinking or considering myself, which leads to a lot of emotional unavailability when it comes to men, a feeling of I can't be vulnerable and I really have to hold it together for my family or my community. We see this very often with young Black boys who grow up in single family homes, especially with just their moms, and they're immediately told as a child, now you have to be the man of the house. And that effect that it can have on them is pretty insurmountable. And so, through these different research projects and community projects that we're engaging in, we're trying our best to find out what are the most common cycles or patterns that people from different communities and backgrounds, especially within communities of color, feel that they need to break. And the overall goal is that this will help us to identify those patterns and identify the best types of resources that we need to really put out into communities to support them.
Well, I absolutely love what you're doing. We have covered so much ground here, so much information. We could go on and on. I'm so interested in what you're doing. As we come to the close of the interview, for someone who is just beginning their healing journey, what is the first step toward breaking cycles and creating a different legacy for future generations?
I would say that we're in the process of really working on creating the framework for generational healing. And I can tell you that right now, the framework starts with being very honest with yourself around what is it in your life, in your lifetime, that you want to experience that you have not yet experienced. And the reason why we start with that question is because it allows for us to really be honest with ourselves around something we really want to have within this lifetime. And it anchors us into then the second question, which is, what are you doing? What are you thinking? What are you believing? How are you behaving? That is potentially holding you back from acquiring that thing. And that's a really challenging question to ask, right? Because it's not about looking at the external, it's about looking at the you. And what I always tell individuals is that you do that with a lot of grace, you do that with a lot of compassion, you do that with a lot of love to self, because it's not an easy question. And it might be even something to sit with for a moment. And what I tell people is you have to act as almost kind of like the external observer of your life, the researcher of your life, gathering the information and data, but really taking out the emotional charge when it comes to that, because it can be challenging to look at that. And then the third question is, well, where did you learn that? And I think that's a really great question, again, to sit with is, where did you learn it? How did you learn it? Who did you learn that from? And it's a nice progression because it anchors into something I want to experience in this lifetime I don't yet have, how I may be holding myself back from achieving that, but how did I really learn that? That's a great progression to start with.
Thank you so much, Jasmine, for joining me on the Core Women podcast today.
Yeah, it was such a joy to be here with you.
This is such a great conversation. Thank you so much. You can connect with Dr. Jasmine Escalera on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube.
Thank you for joining us on the Core Women podcast. If today's conversation resonated with you, subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who may benefit from it. To learn more about Dr. Summer Watson, visit corewomen.com, where you'll find leadership and organizational development consulting, mentorship solutions, virtual assistant services through Core Business Solutions, the Human Forward Movement, and the Human Room, a space for meaningful conversations about keeping people at the center of leadership, business, and community. Dr. Watson is also available to facilitate and moderate engaging one-on-one interviews, panel discussions, and group conversations that inspire connection, learning, and action. Until next time, lead with purpose, connect with intention, and remember to put people first and on purpose.